Well, what is up, Brad fans? Thank you for tuning in. And I hope that you've already subscribed wherever you get in your pods, commented, left a rating, a review, that kind of stuff. And I hope that you're following the show at 2Brad for you on Twitter and Instagram. This episode is all virus. All virus. Brad and I break down some new news out of the Ebola situation, out of the Ebola world. Kind of an interesting development going on there. And then we go coronavirus. So I tried to sort of summarize, talk about the differences in the types of tests that are going to be so important as we move forward with opening up and dealing with the next phase of this pandemic. So that's the diagnostic tests and the antibody tests. Hopefully that makes sense. Really stretched our immunology knowledge there. And then we just kind of talked about opening up what we're seeing in our countries, respective countries, UK, Germany, and got a little personal with our feelings about how we feel about opening up. Are we scared? What's the mood? What do we think we should be doing moving forward? That kind of thing. So a little less data driven, but hopefully interesting nonetheless. Yeah, other than that, I think that's everything from me. So, like I said, follow us on our channels, comment, leave us a review, subscribe. That would all help a lot. All right, with that, let's get to the episode. All right, welcome back, Brad fans. You're back with your two favorite Brads. Me, of course, here in Germany, and my British counterpart over there in the lovely, what is it, Cambridgeshire?
Cambridgeshire, lovely, yeah. Flat, rural. That's about
Humid.
all there is to say about it, yeah. It's brilliant in Cambridgeshire because I'm not a great cyclist, but I go out on my bike and I feel like I could win the Tour de France. And then I take my bike somewhere where there's a mild incline, and I'm like, yeah, there's no way I could, even compete on any level. So,
Well, you got to increase your doping.
well, obviously, yeah.
I mean, I know you already dope. I'm just saying you got to do it more.
You mean I'm dope as in I'm cool, or dope as in I drug myself, or both?
We've just alienated anyone listening under the age of 27. I don't know.
Hey,
What does it mean? Am I dope? Does that mean I'm cool, kids? Yo, what's going on?
that's
Ugh,
so woke of you, Flash.
painful.
So woke of you. I don't even
It's
know.
so
Don't know if that
painful.
is the right time to use that phrase, but I've heard the youth band it around, and I thought, well, I'm old, but I look young, so let's give it a go.
This is just a couple of dope woke dudes here
Yeah,
chatting about science. That's what it comes down to.
yeah. And I've got no idea what dope or woke mean, but I have a little bit of an idea about science. So hence we're here.
That's right. And you're gonna start it off. You're
I
gonna kick it
am.
off with probably the most frequent segment on the show, possibly our only segment. I'm using
Yeah,
quotes
yeah. I think
there.
you're right, actually.
But
Sorry, I looked because I just saw a parrot fly by my window. And Cambridgeshire, let me just, to anyone listening outside of the UK, Cambridgeshire is not renowned for its parrots. How weird.
somebody left their cage door open.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we're going to do the segment, and I don't know for what reason. Normally, this is your segment, Flash, but it's fallen to me this week, which I'm happy about. Don't get me wrong. But it just felt a little bit odd putting your shoes on. I'm not going to lie.
Well, it was a test.
Okay, well,
See how you do.
I slipped on your size. You're probably a size 10 or 11, aren't you? I would have thought.
Ooh, I can't
Oh,
remember.
you're in
What we're
Europe. What are you
talking
like?
UK
What are you
or
like? 45 in Europe?
yeah, 43, 44, I
Okay,
think.
so they would be a
Yeah.
little bit tight for me, but
Right.
I'll give it a go. So yeah, Ebola. Well, there's two parts to this story, really, Flash. So
The Ebola
the
update.
Ebola update. So there had been the outbreak that's been ongoing in the Equator province of Northwest Democratic Republic of Congo. It was
Mm-hmm.
the 10th outbreak, and it was actually just about to be declared over. There have been no new cases since the 27th of
We were
April.
so close.
Um, and actually, in that region, there has been no cases. What has happened is another outbreak has happened in um, another part of the Congo. Sorry, backtrack, hit rewind. The 10th outbreak was in a different province altogether. It was in the
No,
North
Kivu,
Kivu, South
Koivu,
Kivu,
yeah.
and Ituri. Yeah, the new outbreak is in the Equateur province, which is in the northwest of the country. They've had 12 confirmed or suspected cases in the last few days. But interestingly, it's a different. It seems to be a different viral strain to the one in the 10th outbreak. Um,
Yeah.
the one that's just about to be declared over. So obviously there's panic stations a little bit. So the last outbreak is the biggest outbreak since records began in the DRC. So there's just short of 3,500 cases during that from August 2018 up until April 27th this year. Um, so now they've had these 12 new cases. So they're worried that this is going to be the spark that lights, the bushfire type thing. So they're throwing everything they can at it to try and contain it. But they don't know where the outbreak has come from because, as I said, it's a new virus strain. While that's going on, there's actually been another outbreak in Uganda. So 3 people there have had a suspected or confirmed case there. So again, they're trying to jump on that while they can and try and stop it from running out of control. So
Really? I did not hear about that one.
yeah, that was on the 11th of June. That announcement came out. So
Shit. Breaking news.
yeah, well, not that we're 6 days in, but yeah, it'll be potentially. It sounds like the Ebola segment isn't going to go away. I think after the last update we gave, we thought we were going to put this one to bed for a little while, but it sounds like it might be back. So
Crazy, right? I mean, okay, so we had the ongoing one that we had been talking about that was the biggest, the second biggest since the big one in 2014 to
yeah,
2016, the West African outbreak. Then you get this one that's kind of been going what since like 2018.
yeah,
It's been
yeah,
rolling,
yeah,
more or less in Congo, and they've mostly kept it in Congo, right? Like it's been basically in the Congo. Like it hasn't the one in 2016 spread to these different countries, 3 different countries, I think. This one has been there, and there was all those. We talked about this on episodes past. All the fears about the spread because it was in a zone with unrest, and
yeah, yeah, yeah,
on a border region, and there was a big city next to it. And so, I mean, as devastating as it was, it felt like it could have been worse, right? And then the case start going down, and we're feeling good about it. Then coronavirus, and then it's like, oh, this one's not over.
right,
So our this we now have another one, the 11th outbreak.
yeah,
Um, is when we heard the reports, when we were talking about, oh, okay, the 10th outbreak is dying down, but now we're getting new cases. Was that, just to be clear, were those new cases, are they now the new outbreak, or is the 10th outbreak still ongoing? That's what
so,
I'm not clear about.
so excuse me. So the 10th outbreak was due to be declared over. I think they've held off doing that until they totally work out that there's not a link between the
Yeah,
two.
right.
But the latest news that I'd seen said that they believe it is now a different strain, so they don't believe it is related. Um,
Right.
so I think they are ready now to declare the 10th outbreak over, but the 11th now starting. So the 12 cases so far are potentially going to be the 11th outbreak.
Right. Insane. And I did see that report that it's like it looks like it's a different strain, so it's and I guess if they can't find, but the thing is like they would be looking for a link in the people, right? Contact tracing, which we always talk about with outbreaks, contact tracing.
Yeah,
Um, they're looking for a link between who traveled from areas of the 10th outbreak to where this new one is. And if they can't find that, it doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't exist. And the strain difference, I don't know off the top of my head, um, how big of a difference in, they mark the strains. Viruses mutate all the time, and a certain level of mutation in a virus is there's still going to be they're still going to classify it as the same strain. You have to meet a threshold of mutations before they call it a different strain.
Right.
And for every virus, I think it's different. For every group of viruses, it's different. It's to be honest, I think it's kind of arbitrary too, right? Like we're like we as humans are just looking at this and being like, well, these are the lines that we're putting in, which we kind of do with all species of things, but it's easier to do obviously with like chickens and people. But viruses is a little more difficult to do. Um, so I don't, maybe there is a link. Maybe there is not some unknown link, and it's just like it's mutated, or that strain has been circulating in the area of the 10th outbreak, and it was never identified, and now it's moving on to this other one. Who knows? But if it isn't, if it really is just another chance happening that's led to this new outbreak, what does that tell us about what is going on with Ebola in Africa? Because now it seems like I mean, we talked about this since the big one in 2016, where it's like, is this going to be the new norm? Is this going to be the new where this just keeps cropping up?
Yeah.
Like, have we reached a point where contact between bats, I think we've confirmed that bats basically are responsible. And bats are getting such a bad rap. Oh
Yeah.
man.
That
People are just
bats are the
getting,
new rats. They're the new flea. They're the new
or
vector, aren't they?
mosquitoes, right? Like
Right.
mosquitoes were the worst, right? Malaria and everything else. And it's like, man, bats, you got to chill. People are going to start coming for you.
Yeah.
People
Yeah.
are going to start looking at, like, if they didn't eat so many mosquitoes, people would already be like, what are we doing with these things?
Well, and maybe it all comes back to the mosquito because of that.
Yeah. 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 We got to, we need the bats to eat the mosquitoes. But no, that's like it's crazy. And then now there's one in Uganda, and we don't know where that one has come from.
No.
That again could be a travel associated with the Congo. We don't know. My geography in that region is pretty bad, so I don't know if they border each other.
And that's actually they do border each other. So yes,
Okay,
uh,
so it could be a spillover.
yeah, and again, it's in the northwest, so it's where the outbreak is. The 10th outbreak is just finishing, so it's now just over the border. So
Okay.
yeah, that potentially be one to watch, and I think it would be interesting to see in Uganda how it's managed any differently to the DRC and whether it spreads or not. But I think you're right. The key phrase of coronavirus now is the new normal, isn't it? And that's the thing. Is it going to be a case that we're never going to see Ebola go away? I know there's been the new vaccine that's been recently approved in Europe and stuff. So maybe once the vaccination program rolls out, maybe we will see a decline. But for the time being, is the new organs. We are going to see the sporadic outbreaks, and we just have to jump along over it. I think the only positive, and there was a little bit of talk about it in the research that I did, but it didn't go into a great deal of detail, was so the last patient in the 10th outbreak was discharged in the middle of May, but they've not declared it over yet. But they're actually then starting to talk about, because of the measures that are being put in place globally, not just in the DRC, for coronavirus, actually, will that slow the spread anyway of Ebola or whatever because of the social distancing and whatever. Now, I don't think they're being as strict as some countries in the way that they've implemented it. But it'll be. I
Yeah,
think
I don't know
that's
what the measures are like in Africa. It does, from reports and stuff that I've seen, it's not
well,
not great.
and I think it's also hard to trace, isn't it? Because I think track and trace and the testing there is not on a par with some of the other countries. But I think that'll be, as we do future Ebola updates, that maybe is something that we should tie in and see if there is a link between
Mhm.
coronavirus numbers and how they're going up compared to Ebola numbers. But
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, yeah, it's interesting. I'm just trying to think about the transmission modes of the two diseases, and Ebola is obviously way harder to catch. So you would think if there's like the social distancing measures and stuff like that in place for a respiratory infection, Ebola you know,
yeah,
should be no problem. I mean, you'll still get I guess household transmission is still, and family transmission is still a big part of Ebola. And so if people are, you're living in a house with 10 people, that's your family. You're not social distancing amongst those people. So those
right.
people could also get sick. And, we've talked about the funeral, doing funerals and stuff, and just healthcare workers and how much they're affected with Ebola and stuff. But I did read that in this new outbreak, healthcare workers are getting the vaccine right now.
Right.
So, maybe that does, um, prevent this from getting big, because this will be the first one then where the vaccine is available from the get-go.
Yeah, that's true actually. So it'll be interesting how quick, if they roll it out at all, and how quickly they roll it out, and what their piece
Yeah.
with it. So I didn't have a chance to dig into that. If I'm
Well, I
keeping
think it's
hold of
still
the
really
reins
early
of
too.
the Ebola update, then I'll take it on for next time. If not, then I'm going to throw that over the wall to you. But
Well, yeah, we should take it. We should follow that, because it will be. I think it is now. Yeah, the first time that the vaccine is available, like I said, I just briefly read before we hit record that the healthcare workers are getting it. So see how that stops or reduces spread. Um, but yeah, and to me, it's just fascinating that like a potentially not another one. Like, what are the chances? And that's what it seems like, is that the chances of getting a spontaneous outbreak are increasing. That's what it looks like if you're seeing these, based on 30 years ago. So what is that difference? We always say these things like, well, climate change can be driving these things, deforestation, people moving into areas, coming into more contact with wildlife, stuff like that. There's clearly something going on. And can you pinpoint one factor? Probably not, but I don't know. That's intriguing to me and kind of, terrifying in the same way. I mean, Ebola's not coming to Europe anytime soon. It's not coming to, out of Africa anytime soon. But that doesn't, make it not important and not scary for the people that are there. And if that's one that keeps popping up, I mean, it's just, yeah, it's crazy.
yeah, yeah, totally.
Well, that's the Ebola update.
That's the Ebola update in a nutshell, bigger nutshell than probably it was going to be, but it was good to chat. And as I said, one that we'll definitely follow up on, because I think it's going to, even if the outbreak doesn't grow, and I hope it doesn't, I think it's going to be an interesting one to watch now with the virus control measures that are being put in around the place and the
Mhm.
vaccine stuff.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
anyway, Flash, talking of one virus, let's talk about another virus.
Yeah, the virus that everyone's talking about. This
Yeah.
is we're doing all virus this episode, all virus all the time.
Well, I've heard it's the best way to go viral. So
There you go,
you,
throwing around some terms that the young people use again.
hey,
That's the theme of this episode.
yeah, I'm down with the youth.
And the hippity hoppity and the whatnot and all
Oh
the
yeah,
cool things going on.
yeah. I've got some high tops that I pop on when I bust some
Radical,
moves. Yeah, that's the way I roll.
radical.
Yeah, totally.
All right, yeah. On to the coronavirus. So we wanted to touch on this. We'd done a couple episodes, done a couple things, not keeping our distance, keeping our social distance from Corona, just to give everybody a break and stuff. But we thought we would revisit it again, um, as kind of a Corona update. Let's say countries are starting to open up. We're seeing that in Germany for sure. Yeah, in the U.S. Although, did the U.S. ever really close down? I don't know.
Well,
We'll
that is a very good question. We'll come on to that in a minute.
The UK for sure. You guys have had a pretty harsh stay indoors the last couple months, and Europe, in general. But as with this, as we're moving out of this phase, it's important, I think, to remember that this isn't over. In a lot of places, it feels like it's over. It's not over. And it's not the time to get complacent. And we'll talk about easing the measures and how we feel about that, and what the sort of measures are in our respective countries going forward. But a big part of how we manage this thing is going to be testing, and we've heard about it from the beginning of this outbreak. Testing, testing, testing. We need testing. Without it, you don't know who's got it. Without knowing who's got it, you can't do the contract tracing to see who they might have spread it to. all of that. So this is, testing is going to be a big thing. And we've kind of touched on it briefly in other episodes where we've said in passing, there's this type of testing and there's this type of testing. So I thought I could go into a bit more detail
Yeah.
on, the what types of testing are out there and where we're kind of at with them and what the pros and cons, I guess, of each of them are. So um put together a brief summary, I guess, rundown of these things. And really what it comes down to is that there's two major tests that we're going to need going forward. And that's what they call nucleic acid tests and antigen tests. So both of these, well, any test really, and there's actually a third, or sorry, nucleic acid tests, there's antigen tests, and then there's serological tests. So the two
Right.
big ones that are going to be mostly used and that you're going to hear about the most going forward are nucleic acid tests and the serological tests. The antigen tests, I don't know as much about them, and I don't think they're as used uh, in terms of managing an outbreak and getting information on how the disease works. But
So the
basically,
the antigen
yep.
test is the nasal swab, isn't it? That's
Yeah, so an antigen test is it's looking for the things on the virus that the immune system would recognize. So parts of the virus that the immune system would recognize, and
yeah.
you can develop a test that finds those. So antigens we hear about are the things that our antibodies, our body's immune system, component of the immune system, the antibodies, which we've all heard about. Antibodies seek out antigens and they do so in a way that's like specific. So a specific antibody will be designed to find a specific antigen on a virus, a bacteria, a toxin, whatever. Antigen basically just means something on a foreign entity coming into your body that the immune system can recognize.
Right. Yeah.
So that's an antigen test. And I don't know a lot about them other than, that's it. That's what they're looking for. Um, so it would be a type of test to show that you have uh, the virus in your body. Um, but I don't think they're as used as these other ones, as the nucleic acid test. So the nucleic acid test is really kind of like I'm not going to say the gold standard, but it's what's used the most to determine if you have virus in your body right now. So this is the diagnostic test to say, do you have the disease? And this is done by what nucleic acids are the things that make up DNA, RNA, all these things. So these tests look for that. And the way they do it, they take a swab, and then in that swab, there might be a little bit of virus RNA. In this case, coronaviruses are RNA viruses. So they're made up of RNA, which is just related to DNA, but just slightly different. So what you have to do then is you have to find that RNA in the sample, replicate it, turn it, reverse transcribe it as they call into DNA, and then replicate that a bunch so that it's detectable. It's doesn't matter that level of specificity in the explanation doesn't matter if you're not sure what the differences between RNA, DNA, and all that stuff are. Basically, it takes a bit of time, at a minimum 2 to 3 hours, and anywhere up to 12 hours. And then in terms of, how your lab is working and stuff, you can get the results in like 2 to 3 days, or in
Right.
some
Yeah.
places they're reporting is taking weeks and stuff. And that's because you have to do this process of there's minute amounts of, you know, RNA in this sample. You have to, in the lab, isolate that out of the sample, replicate it, flip it back over into DNA, replicate it again, and it's kind of complicated lab process. And we do this all the time. Like this is now a very common procedure. So we can do it. It's not like it's a new technology or anything, but it takes a while. And in order to get in order to get a reliable result, it depends on the quality of the sample. It depends on the viral load. So we talk about viral load, which is really just like how much virus is in there. Like if you were to break it down, it's like viral particles per milliliter or per
Right.
micrometer, not milliliter, that would be way too big. Micrometer. You know, all of these things, how well your lab staff is. Do they know how to, really handle these specimens, because you got to keep them free from contamination, you got to keep them at right temperatures, all this kind of stuff, right? So there's a lot of things that can go wrong along the way in those processes. So what you end up happening is you can get a lot of false negatives in this. So if you mess up any one of these steps, and even if just like you have to add all these different enzymes and stuff to the test in order to replicate the DNA, all this, what if your enzymes are bad? What if they've been left out of the fridge too long? Like there's all of these things. And that was actually some of the things that, we heard about in the US, where they were having, a problem with their test,
Right.
where they didn't use the WHO one and they wanted to go with their own test and stuff. That was what happened when they found out that their tests weren't working. It was because the reagents were spoiled. Like the reagents were off,
So
so
so when I so last weekend, so 9, 10 days ago, I ended up having a swab test, an antigen test, um, because I'd signed up for a clinical trial and you report your symptoms every day, and then it triggers, follow up if needed. So I'd recorded one day that I hadn't slept very well, and the next day I recorded that I felt tired, which, the one normally follows the other. And like 10 minutes later, got an email saying, please come for a test. And I was like, but I don't, I haven't got a cough, I haven't got a fever. But I'll go for the test. And actually, it just coincided with a friend of mine that I'd socially distanced from the previous day had actually started to come down with cough type symptoms. So I was like, well, actually, I would love to have a test anyway.
yeah.
Um, so, and the process was really interesting. I'll maybe come on to the process in a bit. But what was interesting for me is actually the people doing it were students doing the
Hmm.
actual
Hmm.
test. And actually, when I came home and started digging into it, one of the immunology academics in Bristol actually was saying that they believe that the rate of false negatives is around about 20%, which is huge
Yeah.
because of the people doing the testing. They've had training, but they're not medical professionals. So they were saying
Yeah.
that obviously the test isn't always 100%, and may or may not be shedding or have the antigen present at the time. But they think the biggest issue is actually the method of testing, as opposed to doing the serological tests and things, which is
Yeah.
a bit more definitive. But yeah, sorry, just wanted to interject because
Yeah.
based on
Yeah. Yeah.
personal experience, I dug into it a little bit. So I said, oh, I kind of know what he's on about here.
Yeah. Well, in the nucleic acid test, so I'm taking this little tidbit here, this stat or piece of data from I think it was a Science Translational Medicine paper. Obviously, we'll link it on the show notes and stuff. But in looking at other studies, or a combination of studies for these nucleic acid tests, the rate of false negatives can be up to roughly 30% of patients, and that can range from 10 to 40. They've seen in different studies, so 10% to 40% false negatives, which is not great. I
No,
mean, it's what we got, and like I said, in an experienced lab that knows how to handle the samples, that knows what they're doing and stuff, that number probably comes down to the 10, that you see, which is still not great, but it's really this, finding the virus, you know, RNA in the body and being able to replicate it is sort of the definitive kind of way of saying,
yeah.
okay, the virus is in your body right now, therefore we're deeming you to have it. Interestingly, though,
I'm borrowing my
um,
teeth. You okay?
yes, might be the one or two beers. Um, the the real like gold standard of saying like, do you have replicating virus in your body, because this is the other thing, right? Like you can have virus in your body and be like, okay, we've deemed him or her positive, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's actively,
Yeah,
replicating in your cells, that you're spreading it, that kind of thing, right? Like you could catch someone at the end of their course of illness and it's just sort of like residual viral particles left over in the body, right? um the gold standard is they take that sample and they actually put it into lab culture cells and see if it survives. And so then you can say, okay, this person had active, virus replicating in their body. But anyway, just a little tidbit. So yeah, this nucleic acid test. This is the one that the diagnostic test that is mostly used, and it's going to be used to find people who have the virus so that we can isolate them, treat them, and then spread out and do contact tracing from them.
Right. Yeah.
That's that. And the thing with any of these tests is you've probably heard about sensitivity, specificity. We've mentioned now false negatives. You can also get false positives. And so these are the sort of standards that people are trying to get to. You're trying to maximize sensitivity and specificity and minimize the false negatives and positives, because that really messes with how you deal with an outbreak. So sensitivity we can think about as a positive test in somebody that has the disease. So the more sensitive your test is, the more likely you are to find your test to be positive for someone that actually has it. Specificity is, how likely is a negative test coming from a healthy
Yeah.
individual. So how often your negative is actually negative. And then the other terms that might get thrown around is negative predictive value, which is basically the chance that a person with a negative test is truly disease free, and positive predictive value, the chance that a person with a positive test is truly positive. So those are the things we look at. And so from there, we can move to the serological tests, because these right now have problems with both of these measures. And we're hearing a lot about the antibody test, and oh well, if you've gotten an antibody test and you have the antibodies, that means you're immune or you have resistance. And people have thrown around these ideas of like, oh well, you can get an immunology passport and we'll let those people go back to work versus you're not, and all of these things. And it's just, there's a bit of issue with that. So serological tests, these so-called antibody tests, basically look for anything in the immune system that would react to the virus. So there's different tests for different things. So a lot of times we're talking about antibodies. So we're looking for specific antibodies that, as I mentioned before, are designed to lock onto SARS-CoV-2 antigens. But you can also have serological tests that look at other immune cells. And you could say, okay, these immune cells are elevated. That's likely that there's something going on or whatever. But the antibody ones are good because they're very specific to the pathogen that you're looking for. So if you know what the specific antibody for the pathogen is, you can look at it and you can say, okay, within whatever it is, percentage of confidence, this antibody is only going to react to this virus or this strain of virus. Now there is some what they call cross reactivity. So for example, the SARS-1 virus and the
Yeah.
SARS-2 virus are related enough that the antibodies might be similar enough that the test would pick up both. Don't think that's a huge issue, because I don't think there's a lot of people walking around with SARS-1 antibodies.
You'd hope
The
not.
outbreak, yeah, the outbreak wasn't that big, and a lot of people died from that. So don't think there's a lot of SARS-1 antibodies going around that would trip the test, that would flip the test positive when in fact it's negative. We should note that it's the same for the nucleic acid test, because when we talk about they use these things to find the RNA and flip it back to DNA and then amplify it, you need to have a target of a specific sequence of that RNA that you're looking for. So if a virus, different strains of a virus or related viruses are very similar, that sequence of RNA that you're looking at you know, might be similar enough that the test's going to pick up both. But anyway, so that's how that works. So the antibodies that we're really kind of looking at or are interested in or get tested for a lot are called IgG or IgM antibodies. And so a brief bit about antibodies here, because the immune system is incredibly complicated. And I asked Brad before the podcast how his immunology was, and he said flaky at best. And mine is maybe, a step up from flaky. I'll say brittle, but also not good.
Hey, I heard of IgG, I've heard of IgM, so I feel as if maybe I undersold myself on flaky.
All right, well, there you go. So, antibodies basically they're produced by what we call B cells, and there's different classes of antibodies. And as we've mentioned now a couple times, antibodies are designed to lock on to a specific viral, bacterial, whatever target, right? And then the different classes of antibodies, this IgG versus IgM, they do different things. So IgG is a very common. It makes up like the most of your antibodies. So the biggest proportion of your antibodies are IgG antibodies, and they'll lock on to the different pathogens and sort of neutralize them. So they'll either um, kill them right away or block them from being able to lock onto other cells, that kind of thing. IgM antibodies are they will flag that their target is in the system, and they'll start to ramp up other immune cells to come deal with the situation and basically set this cascade in motion of different things. When I did the In Conversation episode with Constance Finney, she kind of gave a rundown a bit of the immune system and stuff too. We talked about that, so you can check that out. But basically, yeah, it's like different antibodies do different things. Some of them signal and tell other cells, "Hey, we need a lot of you, so start replicating, start dividing, so we can get a lot of you going." Other ones just like tag on to the virus and shine like a beacon so that the cells called natural killer cells can come in,
Right,
and
yeah.
they'll anything that's blinking with this antibody, they'll come in and just swoop in and destroy, all these kind of things. But IgG and IgM are the ones that we look for because IgM gives you like they're some of the first to start, so you can get them sort of earlier on in in your infection, and they signal that like things are going on, things are happening. And IgG, like I said, is the ones that actually kind of provide this protective thing. So I this is all, again, like I said, brittle knowledge of immunology, so I may be mixing up some of the specifics here and there, but I think IgG are the ones that you would look for in terms of saying we have lasting immunity. Like if you would look for those because they're the ones that are doing all this like killing and neutralizing and
Yeah.
stuff, and they are they make up the most of your antibodies. um so that's why you want to look for those ones. Where do we go now? So for the test, unlike the diagnostic test, this isn't a good way of showing whether you have the disease now, because your immune system needs time to mount the response, right?
Yeah.
So you really, to get a good antibody response and like be able to like really capture these things in a blood test or something, you need to wait some days. So um, they're saying that for patients with COVID, in order to mount an antibody response, it's usually between day 10 and 21 after infection. So
So basically, it's more of a test of you've been exposed to it as opposed to I
you
currently
have it
have it.
now. Yeah. I mean, you could still be in that window where you currently have it and your immune system is going, but, that's kind of a harder estimation to make. Uh, Detection of mild cases can take even longer, so like 4 weeks or more before you have these antibodies. And there's a small number of cases where people don't have the antibodies at all. They're not detectable, at least anyway, during the time scales of the studies that have looked at this. Um, so these tests are really good. They can get accuracies of like up to 100% when samples are taken 20 days post-infection. Getting this from a information page on the European Center for Disease Control. But samples that are taken earlier than that aren't as good because the body could still be building up a response. Again, there's the question of cross reactivity. If the two viruses are related enough that the antibodies could light up both tests. Um, And this leads to the major problems that we talked about of false positives and false negatives. So you see that a lot. We talked about nucleic acid tests. There's an issue with false negatives, not so much with false positives. But here we do get both. You get false positives and false negatives. And you can see how that would be bad for, both the person who's getting the test if they're told they don't have it or didn't have it when they actually do, and more so being told you do have it or did have it and not actually having had it. So not only does it screw up the data that we would use in order to try and, make estimations and make moves about how we're going to open up, how we're going to, you know, do we have this herd immunity level, all this kind of stuff. It could also put somebody at a false sense of security. So it's not good.
Well, and the other thing with this is, and you touched on it earlier about the immunological passports. As far as I'm aware, I know there's studies ongoing, but I've not seen the data yet to show actually you can't be reinfected and get it back. How long does that immunity get conferred for? I think they've shown that you're not shedding once the antibodies are there, and the viruses. I think they've said out to 21 days post the first symptoms, and you're not shedding. But I think there's that whole piece around, well, actually, as you said, you test for it, the antibodies are there, but what does that, you know what that means for you if you're not showing symptoms, brilliant, but are you likely to be reinfected again? And if so, how long?
Yeah. And that's the thing that we'll get to that because we just don't know, is
Right.
the answer. Now, there was a health reporter for the New York Times that I listened to on the New York Times podcast. So obviously he's a well-respected health and medicine reporter. And he was saying that, the official scientific narrative is that we don't know. We don't know what the answers to that are. But because they were finding the IgG, IgM antibodies, it indicates like in other diseases, those are the ones that usually give you the long lasting protective effect.
Right.
So people are encouraged by that finding, but you still can't say for certain whether that's true or not. Um, but he even quoted some sort of unnamed sources, doctors that he knows that are acting on that assumption that they've had it, they've been exposed, they have the antibodies, so they're, acting as though. But let's reiterate here that you shouldn't do that because we don't know, and WHO guidelines, every European CDC is all going to tell you, still maintain all of your protective measures because we just don't know. Um, and at the moment, these tests have problems. We have some tests out there that are good, but there's just a flood of tests onto the market. That's the other thing that I think we should mention is that with all of these tests, there's different companies offering different tests. So it's not like it's one test that everybody uses. They're all using the same science, they're all using the same idea, but
Right.
they
Yeah.
have different chemistry in order to find these antibodies and bind them and, you know, allow you to visualize that or detect it in some manner. Like there's different ways you can do that. So the concept is the same, but everybody kind of does it differently. And so you have all of these companies that usually these things are done, they're made for research, right? So when it's not life and death on the line. Um, and now you have to do it for a medical clinical setting. The standards of what you can get right and wrong is way, way different.
Yeah.
Um, and it didn't help that the FDA in mid March loosened its standards and allowed companies to sell antibody tests without submitting prior clinical evidence that they worked. And then they eventually changed that in mid April, I think. And now they have to mandate this. Companies have to show this proof of efficacy. But a bunch of tests went out there that nobody even really knew what the false positive rate was, what the false negative
Well,
rate was.
we had a similar thing in the UK because the government here spent, I think it was £16 million on antibody tests from China, and then when they put them through the validation procedures, they were in no way accurate. So
Yeah.
they just didn't meet the criteria for safe and efficient testing. So, it has amazed me that all these pop-up centres have popped up, both for the antigen test and now for the antibody test. We're starting to see them as well. But yeah, I think the point you just made is really important, Flash. Well, what degree of validation and testing has gone on to show that these tests are accurate? Because an inaccurate test is more dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. And like I said, these aren't the ones that are going to tell us, that are going to inform our contact tracing, isolation procedures, that kind of thing. But these things are going to be really, really important in terms of, understanding how many people in the population may have been exposed. They can still inform on, what areas of the country are experiencing an outbreak, how far that outbreak has reached, like what's the reach of that outbreak, this kind of thing. They're still really important tests. And of course, they're going to help us understand what what the resistance level is, like what that is. Um, so yeah, they're an important thing, and we're not there yet. So like I've talked to some people that are saying, oh well, these antibody tests are showing already that like a third of people have it and never even noticed it. So and they're using this to justify, well, why are we even doing this lockdown? It's not that big of a deal because all these more people have it and they weren't even sick. So really less people are getting sick. And, uh, or, we're already almost at herd immunity and stuff. And it's like, we're not even there. We're
Yeah,
not even there. These things aren't that reliable yet. Um, and so then this moves to the longevity of the antibody response. We don't know how long that antibody response lasts. Even if you had, like, let's say we got a perfect test and we could say you have the antibodies, you don't. We don't know how long that antibody response lasts. In other coronaviruses, it can last from 12 to 52 weeks from the onset of symptoms. Some studies from, again, the European CDC page that I was looking at says that the SARS-CoV-2, IgM and IgG antibody levels may remain over the course of 7 weeks. Um, at least in 80% of the cases they've seen up until day 49. SARS-1 patients, so related strain of coronavirus, the patients were shown to maintain IgG antibodies for 2 years. But this your level of antibodies can be affected by a lot of different things. Your age, how much virus you were exposed to, how sick you got, all of these things. So just having antibodies doesn't even necessarily mean that it's providing resistance. How many of those, what's the concentration of antibodies that you need in order to be protected? How long are those going to last? All of these things. So then the question of, does reinfection happen? Well, we just don't know. Two monkeys were
is this
given,
a joke?
yeah, two monkeys walked into a lab. One coughed on the other one. Yeah.
That's the way it started. It's just, oh, hold on, Flash is going to tell a joke halfway through his
Yeah.
pitch here.
Yeah, yeah. No, it'll be a nursery rhyme in years to come. Two monkeys, two rhesus monkeys coughing in a lab. One
One
got
had
SARS and the other got
coronavirus.
sad.
Yours was
uh,
much better.
yeah. No, so they gave two rhesus monkeys SARS-2, let it run its course, and then after 2 weeks, that when they weren't exhibiting any more symptoms, they re-exposed them, and those monkeys didn't get it. But I mean, this is a sample size of two, and in monkeys, so who knows? And like I said, timing of when you get re-exposed would matter. uh, is your immune system waning at that point, or is it still
Right.
robust? Like, there's so many things that we don't know. So the point of all this moving forward is just that you're going to hear a lot about testing and the need for testing, and this is absolutely true. We need that, and hopefully our lockdown measures in many countries have avoided the worst. um, and we're fearing a second wave in the fall. That's now the talk, that when the weather gets cold again, that we could see a second wave. In the time, if we've bought ourselves some time and the summer months are good, this is what we should be working on, is getting both of these tests, the nucleic acid test and the serological tests. Get them good. Get a good version of them that you
Right.
can work and that you can scale up, because that's the thing. You need you got to produce the chemicals to do these things, the reagents to do these things. So this is what we need to be focused on, and we're going to need both of those, both the nucleic acid and the serological test. Ideally, you're going to want to be running these in parallel. The first one, the nucleic acid, to identify, isolate, treat sick patients, also to find the pre-symptomatic and asymptomatic patients, so people who
Right. Yeah.
have the virus in them but they aren't exhibiting symptoms
But
yet.
could be spreading it, and
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. And that's the thing, is we need to know who those people are, so we can get that data of just
Right.
understanding, are they spreading? Who's spreading when? How much virus do you have in your body before you're spreading? All this kind of stuff. What's the level of asymptomatic people, and are they spreading? The WHO went through a little, another hiccup that, conspiracy theorists are going to just use to talk about how shitty the WHO is, but they said, well, we don't, asymptomatic patients might be very rare in spreading, but then they had to walk that back because it was like a misstatement or whatever, and it's like we just don't know. Um, and then it's also going to help us. Those nucleic acid tests will also help us just see infection rates across populations. Just how many people, what proportion of the population is infected? Is that growing? Is it not growing? And then the serosurveys, the serological tests, the antibody tests are going to find the individuals that have this antibody, this potential immunity, and we're going to need to see how long that lasts. So obviously, this is also going to help with vaccine development. If you can see which antibodies are being produced, you can then, test your vaccines against that. Is my vaccine producing those antibodies? And when we're going to have to see, like we've just been talking about, what level of antibodies do you need to be protected? How long do we make them last? That's going to inform, you know, is the vaccine producing that level of antibodies? Is it inducing that level of antibodies? And do we need multiple doses of the vaccine? When do you need your boosters? All that kind of stuff. So you're going to want to be doing these things in parallel. And unfortunately, because this is a new disease, with these serological tests, we don't have the what they call longitudinal data. So we don't have data sets of the same person for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years,
Right.
six
Yeah.
years, so you can really see, okay, this person had coronavirus in 2019, and we checked them again in 2020 and in 2021 and in 2022 and 2023, and we see how the antibody levels change. Are they still there? Is it still at the threshold that we deem would give you protection? All that kind of stuff. So a lot of countries have made strides on testing, and testing is absolutely key. And our diagnostic testing, like we said, when done with a lab that knows what they're doing and they got their kits right and stuff like that, false negative is an issue, but it's pretty good. It's pretty good, and it's where we should be moving towards. But the serological tests aren't there yet, and this is really going to, help us figure out what we do moving forward. So there's positive steps being made, but we're not there yet. So when you're hearing all this stuff about testing and whatnot, be encouraged that people are working on it. But at the moment, we can't rely too much on some of these, especially the serological tests. From what I can see, the data there is still a little fuzzy, and we're still working to find the best test. And there's like a consortium of people, including the WHO and a group in Geneva and the Infectious Disease Association of America, that have got together to sort of run through all the tests and say which ones are working, which ones aren't, and they're going to try and sort out what ones we should be going with, and then make those recommendations available to governments and countries all over the world. All right, that was my testing spiel. That was a long one.
I kind of blacked out there for most of it, but no, and I think, and we can obviously move on to the next piece in a minute. But yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, since I got tested last weekend, I started to delve into it a little bit, and I know we're going to come on to pieces like it at the moment, but the UK hasn't fully implemented its track and trace system yet. So
Right.
they've hired, I think, 20,000 tracers, so people that will contact people. But the app that they've developed in the UK government have gone away from like the Google and the Apple app or
Mm.
Basis app. They decided to build their own. They're testing it on the Isle of Wight at the moment. but it's just not been rolled out enough at the moment. So that it needs to be a two pronged attack. I think they've in the UK at least they've come under such fire, heavy fire, for not being able to test enough when they said they could. So they've really thrown the weight and a lot of money and resource into getting the testing there, especially the anti-gen test, so the test for whether you currently have it or not. But they haven't thrown so much into the antibody test. I know Roche in the UK, or Roche have developed a test that's now been approved in the UK for antibodies. Um, and obviously both those tests and the track and trace system, once it's up and running, will be pivotal. But I know countries like South Korea, where Big Brother is watching, have implemented a track and trace system based on CCTV surveillance and facial recognition,
Yeah, it's
which is
creepy.
really it is creepy, but it's also quashed the second wave of the virus in its footsteps, which is really interesting. So
Yeah. We could do a whole episode on this, and maybe we
oh,
should.
definitely, yeah,
Is the apps, because Germany just released its app as well, um, and I'm torn as to what to do with that. But yeah, that's an interesting thing. But it with all contact tracing methods, it's based on testing.
right,
If you
exactly,
don't have a test, you don't know who to trace. You don't know who to contact and who to trace. So that's the thing. And then, well, let's move then now to, the systems that are in place. You mentioned that the UK just hired a bunch of people to do contact tracing. Germany's the same. They're hiring 100,000, people to fan out across the country and form these teams. And you mentioned for your clinical study that you were part of, it's students, and students are doing a lot of this work. A lot of medical students are getting signed up to, or volunteering, or being hired to do contact tracing, because as we lift the restrictions and people start going out, and doing things, we need a system of catching the embers before they burst into wildfires, and
right,
containing that. That's the name of the game moving forward. Um, so I know Germany's got an emergency brake system for our loosening of the restrictions, where it's like, if they find 50 cases in 100,000 people in an area over 7 days, boom, you're back in lockdown.
right,
So,
okay,
and in any week, if you have 50 cases found in 100,000 people living in a geographic area, I don't know how big that geographic area is, but boom, you're shut down. You're back into it. That's one of our big things here. But right now, restaurants are open, bars are open, but you cannot have bar service. Like, you have to be seated at an
right.
establishment. You can't be all standing by the bar, breathing over each other, yelling at the bartender for drinks and stuff. And every state is different here in Germany. There's slight differences on these.
So it's not been managed at the federal level, and it's
No,
devolved down,
Germany is very reluctant to do things from the top down,
right?
for obvious historical reasons. They don't want to do that again. So their whole system is very decentralized. So the health system and these regulations as well. It's up to, there is a federal plan, and every so whatever time, once a month, 2 weeks. I don't know how often they meet, but all the heads of the states meet with Angela, and they develop a plan. And there's certain things that are nationwide, but it's a lot of it is still up to the states. So there's variation in what
Okay,
each state is doing. For example, we had one state, Thuringia, that wanted to just, like, screw it. You know what? We don't even think this is a big deal anymore. We're just going to open up everything. No social distancing, no masks. Forget about it. We're not, it's done. It's over. And the federal government had to come in and be like, "You don't do that." And all of the neighboring states, and it's like right in the middle of Germany, so it touches a lot of them. We're just like, come on, man, don't do that. This is not a good idea. Um, but yeah, basically restaurants are open. We can travel around Germany. They've released border restrictions, I think, in all of the continental Europe, mostly. The Schengen zone for sure, which is like these are the sort of northern European countries are part of the Schengen region.
Yeah.
Um, so you no longer need a reason to cross the border. So people can come into Germany, people can go out of Germany into these other countries, and you don't need a reason. You won't get stopped at the border. And as far as I know, there's no mandatory self quarantine when you come back. There's still no air travel to Spain. That's going to change in the next 2 weeks. I think July 1st that'll resume again, and air travel is still not as open as other travel. But like I get back to the sort of day to day things. All the shops are open. Non essential businesses are open, but you have to maintain social distancing. You have to wear a mask in all public uh, indoor locations. So on the transit, on the train,
Right.
in
Yeah.
a restaurant. In a restaurant, it's until you sit down. When you're at your table, you obviously you take it off because you got to
Right.
eat. Um, but if you get up and move around the restaurant, you're supposed to put your mask on. Shops, all that stuff, and there's limits on how many people can be in certain shops. So people are limiting how many people can go in at a time because they want to maintain this 1.5 meters distance. So
Okay.
I've heard on some popular podcasts that are one of the most popular podcasts in the world, the Joe Rogan podcast. Him and another guy were laughing at this, like, well, why do I gotta wear a mask when I go into the restaurant, but when I sit down, I can't? Like this doesn't make sense. And it's like I get that a lot of these things don't make sense, but you're just trying to minimize
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, minimizing the
probability.
risk.
You're just
Yeah.
minimizing probability. And the mask thing, yeah, the authorities said masks aren't going to do anything at the beginning, and now we're finding out otherwise. They fucked that one up, but you know what? We just didn't know. So like let's give a break. These are still experts. They're still disease experts, and this is just a brand new thing that we're learning about, so things are going to change.
Yeah.
So
As the data
don't
comes in, it evolves. So it's interesting. I know we talked about this before. So it's interesting that in Germany it's 1.5 meters. So in the UK, it's 2 meters.
yeah.
I know the WHO have said 1 meter.
Which again seems arbitrary, right? Like it's
So
like
yes, there's been a lot of pushback in the UK the last week or so to reduce that 2 meter down to 1 meter. Primarily because they reopened non-essential shops on the 15th of June. But a lot of shops said, with the social distancing measures, they can't open or it's not worth them opening because they just wouldn't get the footfall through the door. So there's been a push to move to 1 meter because of the WHO guidelines saying 1 meter. But it's interesting, obviously, here in the Santa, and it comes down to risk. They're saying, yeah, 1 meter, you know, the risk is X amount. But when you take it to 2 meters, then exponentially that risk comes down even more. And then you said about sneezing, or potentially some of those droplets are going 3 meters, but 3 meters potentially is just totally unworkable. So it is all just a matter of managing risk, be that washing your hands, wearing a face mask, you know, when a parcel arrives, leaving it in the sunlight for 24 hours to kill off the virus or whatever.
and it's gonna seem
It is,
arbitrary. Some of them are gonna seem arbitrary and they're gonna seem
yeah,
stupid, but you're basically especially too when you're trying to like, or you're gonna see distinctions between, well, this is a nightclub versus a restaurant versus a cafe versus, but you're
right,
trying to make these blanket restrictions for a totally nuanced thing, society lot of nuances going on there, but you're just trying to cover as many bases as you can to reduce the amount of, breath in the air, right? Like, and that you're
right,
walking through. Because this was the other thing that the New York Times reporter was talking about is that in terms of transmission, we were talking about droplets at the beginning, and that's still a thing. So, when you're sneezing, coughing, that kind of thing, droplets. But now they're also looking at that there's it's less than that. So even just when we're talking normally, we're producing this mist that we can't see. Everybody's doing it all the time. It's gross
right,
when you think about it. We're all just misting on each other. But this mist, they've now found can hold viral particles and it can last in the air for like 2 to 3 hours. So this is why wearing a mask it cuts down on that level of mist that's potentially infectious in the air. And that could
Right.
maybe that changes and we realize that's not the case or whatever, but this is the current data. So it's like this is why mask wearing is important. This is also why indoor gatherings where there's no breeze that's
Yeah.
circulating the air is a big thing. So being outside might not be that big of a risk, especially if you're spaced apart and
And there's UV sunlight
yeah,
around, and yeah,
and surface transmission may not be as big of a thing as we once thought. I mean, still wash your hands, do all that stuff, but that is appearing to be less of a route than these airborne routes. So that's what these restrictions, these, as we open up, these things are, it may sound silly. Oh, you can do this, but you can't do this. Well, what the fuck's that doesn't make sense. I can go to a restaurant, but I can't go to the bar. Like, what's just trying to avoid certain situations. And like I said, it's not going to be perfect. You're trying to implement a situation that's the best fit for all situations, and it's
yeah. Well, and also it's a new, nobody in our lifetime has gone through this, so it's very easy to criticize governments and whatever for their actions, but they're going through it for the first time as well,
yeah.
and on a mass scale of, if we screw this up, you know we're not only losing voters, we're losing the entire population. So the it's been interesting watching, because this week, as I said, non-essential shops were allowed to reopen. Um, then the next wave is in 2 weeks' time, like start of July. That potentially then they've talked about maybe cafes and restaurants could open. So at the moment they can open, but you can't eat or drink inside. So you can go in,
Pick up your
social
food.
distance, pick up food, and come out. But there's talk of that being the next wave, and then potentially hairdressers maybe 2 weeks after that, because obviously there's physical contact, and how do they then manage that? Um, so it seems to be, I guess they're trying to learn as they go along, aren't they? So they could very easily just say, okay, well, lockdown's over, everyone go about their business, socially distance, and good luck to you, wear a face mask. But then I also wonder whether there is a bit of an experiment going on of, okay, right, we'll ease it in steps. So right, non-essential shops can open, but not ones with physical contact or enclosed spaces and people inside eating and drinking. And let's see what happens to the infection rate and the R number, and let's measure it. And then 2 weeks later, right, okay, well, we've got 2 weeks of data. Let's go to the next stage. Or, oh, no, hold on, we have to pause it. So I do think there is a little bit of learning on the fly as we go with this, because it's just an unprecedented
Mm-hmm.
situation.
100%. And I think that's exactly it. And that's why I keep saying to people too, it's like it could change at any moment. It could change. Infections in Germany per day, new cases per day, I think are hovering around 300. But they had an outbreak in one city, Göttingen, in one apartment block where it was like 70 people tested positive in one, and they were thinking about shutting down the whole city. So it's like this is where we're at. And
Yeah,
I mean it's great. I've when they opened up, I was reluctant. I felt, you know, scared a little bit going out the first time, but also I was like right on board to do it. I was like, I want to go out. I want to do this. I want to, sit in the beer garden and see people not on a screen and hang out. And the but it was a little bit of a, I left the beer garden that night and was talking with my lovely wife Teresa on the way back, being like, is this right? Like, should we,
it's
are and we both kind of said like, yeah, it's okay. It's risk. There's a risk to everything, and we're managing the risk, and society appears to be managing the risk. I mean, we've now gone to another city in Germany for a weekend, and
right.
they didn't seem to be as good with the mask wearing as our city. So, there's different things that are going to be going on. Um, but I think the thing is just to not be complacent. It's like you can stretch your boundaries, do some things. We have some new data. We know what's going to, we know what the risks are. We have better systems in place to hopefully trace and test. And I mean, that's the other thing is like, how confident do you feel in your country's precautions? Like I said, just going from one city in Germany to another, you feel like, well, these people are taking it more seriously than these people. But nationally, or the general guidelines of what is allowed and what isn't allowed, minus the little nuances between the states, I feel pretty okay with this. And Everywhere you go, anytime you go to a restaurant or a bar here in Germany, you have to sign in basically. It's like
Oh,
a
really?
paper sign-in sheet where you have to give your address and your phone number,
So they know you've been there,
what
and
time you were
okay,
there, who you were with, that kind of thing. And this is interesting when it comes to the apps and stuff and the data privacy. We're thinking Germany's notorious for paper bureaucracy. Like everyone always, all the expats here bitch about how it's like, why don't they do things digitally? They still pay with cash, and you go deal with the government, and it's a binder full of paper, and nothing's digital, and it's brutal on most cases. But this is one case where I think, well, maybe it's kind of good because it's like no one can like just with an algorithm data scrape all the phone numbers, because
right, yeah,
if you want to data scrape this, you got to be flipping through every single sheet of paper, and it's just
yeah,
not going to work. And they probably have the infrastructure to deal with this because they're so used to dealing with paper, and the paper will just get shredded after 4 weeks. I mean, you can say that about the databases too. Oh, we're just going to wipe the databases after but like I said, it's much harder to, if you want to be nefarious with the data, to do it when it's paper, when it's an archaic paper
okay,
system.
yeah. And I hadn't realised Germany were doing that. Yeah, I think that's an interesting because
Makes
I think
me
we touched
feel
on here
better.
that yeah, I think the and it's funny, isn't it? I think since you and I started doing these podcasts, I've become more aware of the Big Brother situation and how easy it is for the your data to be taken and used or manipulated. And I know we've talked about like the facial recognition and robotics in warfare and stuff. And the more data that's out there, the more at risk people are. So for me, I never was a big skeptic, and I wouldn't say I'm a massive skeptic there, but I'm very like I've not downloaded the app, and I'm very conscious about actually will I or not.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah. It's a thought,
it is a thought. Whereas I speak to some other people who are like, well, why wouldn't you download the app if it's going to save lives and
and that's a
stop
point
the spread of
too.
the disease? And that's a total point. And I'm like, I can't argue against it. And I'm not saying I won't download the app. I'm just saying before I jump in with both feet, I just want to see how it's going to pan out and how they're going to manage it. But I think for restaurants track and trace, as I said, a friend of mine um, 10 days ago woke up. I'd seen him the day before socially, and it's funny. He's got two daughters who are really on him. Oh, Brad's coming over, right? Dad, you have to socially distance from him.
Yeah,
So I went and had a cup of tea and sat in his garden. Definitely 2 meters apart, and there was no contact. Um, and then the next day he texts me going, mate, I need to warn you. I've woken up this morning with a cough, and I've just been for a test. I don't have a temperature. I think it's hay fever related. But I need to let you know. So then I'm like, well, hold on, who have I come into contact with?
yeah,
So that evening I'd been out for a walk and bumped into a couple of friends. So I messaged them, say, hey, just to warn you, I'm going to self isolate a little bit for the moment. Just to warn you. Like, oh, okay, thanks for that. But then it's like, well, you're right. I can't contact the. I'd gone to the grocery store. I can't
yeah,
contact everyone there, and that's where the app would come into play,
yeah,
obviously. Um, Fortunately, because of this clinical trial I was involved with, I got to go for a test the next day. I was negative. My friend, his symptoms cleared up. It was hay fever related,
yeah,
or even chest infection related. Fine, but it's that one spark that lights the tinder that then
hmm,
takes the place down. And how do you trace that? But I think you're right. Like this week with the shops opening here, I've not. Yesterday, actually, I ventured into like a non-essential shop, I guess, just to go and look for something, and it felt really odd. It felt really odd going to shop. Felt quite nervous about going into the shop, um, and then just seeing other people. The number of people on the streets has definitely increased, and then just very nervous about being around people. And it's such an odd sensation now to be nervous. And I'm not of an anxious disposition, but I know friends that do suffer from anxiety. And I think when lockdown is fully lifted, I wonder if they will ever return back to the old normal, because I think they will always be cautious or anxious until there's a vaccine of being around people, which it's not just the physical effects of the virus; it's the psychological effects of this virus that I think are going to be long-reaching.
yeah. Well, and I mean, we haven't even touched on the psychological effects of the people that were stuck indoors. Like how much domestic abuse has gone up, or alcoholism, or all of these things. But that's a whole nother episode, right?
Right.
I will say, having been, feels like we're like a couple weeks ahead of you guys in terms of opening up. And we definitely here in Germany did not have the deaths that you had in the UK. Um, and I'm going to go out on a limb and say that our testing capacity and contact tracing capacity is a bit better too. Uh,
I'm not going to disagree with you.
yeah. But so it gets to be pretty normal pretty quick, to
Right.
get back out and do things. And that's the thing that every once in a while I have to take a step and be like, am I getting complacent? Am I being too okay with this? And generally, there's still restrictions on the number of people that you're supposed to meet with and how many households can,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
meet. So you can meet at a restaurant, but at the beginning it was like you're only supposed to meet with someone from one other household. Now that's lifting. So it's like you can kind of meet with 10 other people at a time, regardless of household. And again, that changes per state what those rules really are.
Okay.
But, this is, so I've kind of, I have my group of friends here in Marburg, that we regularly hang out, and it's roughly about 10 people that I sort of regularly see. But I don't know what they're doing, some of them when they're not with me. So there's all these things that are there, but it does start to feel normal in terms of, I'm out again, I'm doing things, I'm seeing people, and it's fucking great. It's awesome. But what's also become normal is wearing a mask when I go into places. And I gotta say, here in Marburg, I feel comfortable with people the mask wearing, and it felt weird. I felt really self-conscious, and this is so stupid to be like, when it's a health thing like this, to be like, "Oh, I
Yeah.
feel weird, like, I feel stupid wearing this mask," like, "Oh, I look like an idiot," and it's like, but as soon as I saw everyone else doing it, so there was buy-in from everybody, I was like, "Okay," it just made me feel comfortable, so I don't even think about it anymore. I just throw
So
the
are
thing on
you?
and
Is it a cloth mask you're wearing or a
yeah,
surgical mask or what? Right.
yeah, props to my mom. She sent me and Teresa sewn masks that she made with maple leaves, Canadian maple leaves
Oh
on them.
yes.
Yeah. It's
It's funny.
so
And
funny.
I
It's kinda dorky because as Canadians, that's what we're always doing that. "Oh, hey, look, it's the leaf, ah." But it's great. Thank you, mom. I love the mask. It's awesome because it's you just flip it on, and I actually I like it better than the medical looking one. When you see someone with the
well.
medical looking one, you're like, "Ooh, they're infected," but it's
Okay,
like
well, I
a
was just about
cloth.
to say I've got the medical one, so I was going to say, hey, mum, if you want to sew me one, I don't have a cloth one.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's yeah, I'm a bit like you because it's funny. Before this broke out, occasionally, especially if you went to London or a big city, you'd see some people wearing like surgical face masks.
Yeah. Usually
Um,
Asian people,
yeah,
because
and it's
they're just
a,
that's part of their culture. They
that's
do it.
part of their
Yeah.
culture. Yeah, um, but I think because it's still, or it has been so unusual up until the whole coronavirus thing, people always a bit like you said, oh, maybe these people are infected, and back away a little bit. And then the last couple of weeks, I've had to go out to buying new bits of furniture. So I've been, I bought some stuff off of eBay. So I've had to go to somebody's house to go and pick something up. And that is a very weird experience now because you sort of get there, knock on the door. I stand, 2 meters back from the door when they open the door, and hi, yeah, I'm Brad. I come to pick up the table or whatever I've bought. Um, and what I usually do is I usually take the surgical face mask with me. I'm like, would you like me to
Mask up.
wear this?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think if you just rock up with a face mask on, it looks a little bit scary on the doorstep.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
and it's interesting the mix. Most people have said no, that's fine, or other people say, oh, it's up to you. When they've said it's up to you, I tend to done it
Yeah.
and put it on. But you're right. I feel very self conscious
Yeah.
wearing it. It's odd, but actually, they're talking here now. If you're on public transport, you have to wear a face mask.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna, actually, I was going to order one this week, a cloth one, and I said, but I am going to have to get over the stigma or the
And it
embarrassment
becomes
almost
normal.
of wearing it.
And I mean, it's
Right,
better when everybody does it because, like I said, like I'm glad that there was buy-in in our city because it's like it made it more comfortable for everybody. Now it's just the thing. And I don't wear it if I'm just walking on the sidewalk.
right.
But it's in any shop, I'm wearing that. If I go into a restaurant before I'm seated, I wear it. If I get up from my table to go to the bathroom, I wear it. And everybody's doing it. There's very few people. There's always a few scumbags that don't, but now they look like the ones that are, the scumbags.
The odd ones out,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, yeah,
Um, and that's it. It makes me feel comfortable. It makes me feel more comfortable to go out. And this is the thing. Get going out was weird at first. Got used to it. The new restrictions weird at first. Got used to them. Signing in everywhere I go. You know, wearing a mask. All these things. And so you just you go with it. This is what the experts are telling us is we can do. Don't get complacent, but enjoy the freedoms that are given. Is kind of what I'm looking at it as. And it's going to change. It's going to change with the new data as it comes forward. But travel is still. I don't know about international travel, but within Germany, I feel pretty comfortable with it. And it's really a matter of how comfortable you are with your country. Can they accurately test who's got it and find cases?
right. Yeah,
And where are your case now? Are your cases rising or falling? In Germany, they've gone up as you would expect. Opened up a bit, they've gone up.
yeah, gonna, yeah,
It's what it is, but we're not at the level that we were in terms of going up, and hopefully we'll see little ebbs and flows and stuff of that, but it's really up to everybody just to not be complacent and continue doing these things. It's like we're allowed to leave the house, so the least you could do is wear a mask and sort of maybe not t- all hang out in one house where you're all breathing the same air. And
right,
I think
exactly. Yeah.
that's what we're finding is that it's these places. I'm surprised that churches are open, to be honest. you know that's a place where you're inside, everybody's singing, talking. That's like a real big, you know nightclubs obviously aren't open. Restaurants, everyone's trying to sit outside as much as possible now, but I've definitely been in a few, one at least, where I was like, oh, not a lot of ventilation in here, but wear a mask when you can. I don't know, managing risk, it's weird, we're moving into a weird other phase, but I think the message is like, don't get complacent, but
Well,
we
and
can we can
when you
push
said
the
about
boundary a little bit.
right, exactly, and it's been interesting here watching the R number change. I know, obviously, in the last our 50th episode we talked about R number, um, but it's interesting seeing it change in areas that were really low beforehand. So the area that's had the biggest spike in our number is actually the southwest of the UK, which is a big tourist spot. So actually, since they've started lifting restrictions on where you can have 6 people in a group and you can socially bubble with another house, it's interesting to see that it's the southwest, the R number started to go up, and also a part up in the north, which is a bit of a touristy destination as well, where people are obviously traveling
Yeah.
more now and bringing the virus with them. So and I know the phrase "the new normal," and I every time I say it now, I kind of cringe because it's the new normal,
Yeah.
because I think it's overused, but it really sums up what it's going to be. I don't think this is going to be a quick fix. Most of my colleagues that are office based have been told they won't be in the office this year.
Yeah.
Um, they'll be able to go in for essential stuff on and off, but they'll basically have to log before they go in to make sure there's not more than however many people in the office at one time, and it's going to be this is going to change the way the earth works, for what it already has, and it will continue to do so, I think, for a long time.
Yeah, well, and like, everyone can't stay in lockdown forever. That's the thing, because
Exactly, at
there's a
some
lot of
point capitalism has to take over, and we have to pay
capitalism,
back everything.
human interaction, like, there's all of these things, right? Like, the number of suicides that have gone up in places during lockdown, I'm sure is in certain places. Yeah,
Yeah,
and you got to find that balance, right? And so that's where we're at, is managing your risk, managing your personal risk, managing society's risk. And if we can get testing in place, if we can get contact tracing in place, you can mitigate that. So there will still be bumps in the road and people are still going to die from this disease, but it doesn't have to be hundreds of thousands. It doesn't have to be, hopefully. And the big thing that we need to look for is in the fall, second wave. This is what the public health
right. Yeah,
officials are thinking now. And again, from this New York Times thing that I was listening to, Um, Obviously, different viruses, different situations, different periods of time with different, health measures and stuff like this. But one scientist was looking back at influenza epidemics for the past five big ones or something like this. So 1918, obviously, we know that, but other ones too, not just that one. The first fall of the epidemic was accounted for a huge number of deaths. So as we move into
Oh,
fall,
really? Okay.
yeah, we need to think about, and that's what the summer should be, is about getting contact tracing. If we have a reprieve in the summer, getting contact tracing, getting testing in place, and making sure that we don't get complacent. Because if you have a ton of new cases right before the weather turns bad and everyone has to go back
And everyone goes back
inside,
indoors. Exactly
then
that. Yeah.
then you could just be piling on the tinder and then lighting the bonfire. But if we
Yeah.
spread out that tinder and over the summer, and we're not, but it's difficult, man. It's really difficult. Like I said, it was weird to go outside at the first, but I was also just like, I want to be out here. I gotta, so I don't begrudge anyone that is out there and wanting to do things and stuff. We just don't get complacent. Wear your mask. You might feel like an idiot, but do it.
Yeah. Well,
Don't be a
I think we've
dick.
been on a. Well, but it's funny. Government should just use that message. Don't be a dick. That
Yeah,
would, But the trouble is, if people weren't dicks, then the world would be a better place, and the world's not a better place because people are dicks. It's a vicious cycle.
here we go.
You always have to work to the lowest common denominator. So, shall I summarise where we've been on
Sure.
this journey
I feel like
today?
I've rambled enough.
Well, so obviously, Ebola. It's on potentially on its way back. We'll keep an eye on it. We'll keep the listeners updated. Yeah, it'll be an interesting one to watch. Obviously, then coronavirus. So, one is a positive, not a positive flash. One it's a false positive, of course. So we've talked about testing and
Correct.
the impact that has and needs to have for us to get control of this virus. Um, and I think when all this is over, if nothing else, then you may have inspired a new nursery rhyme about coronavirus and testing. But so we should patent the rights to that because that could be a real moneymaker.
That's
That
right.
could be
Could
our
be the
ticket.
new
That
ring
could be the
around the
ticket to
rosy.
finish it. It could be. So yeah, let's see how that goes from there. As always, listeners, we do this for you. We had a great response to the 50th episode, both before, in terms of people sending in stuff, and I've had positive comments afterwards, which is always nice to hear. Keep your negative comments to yourself. I would say if you want to reach out to the show, you can do so on most of the social media platforms. So on Twitter, @2BradForYou, on Instagram, @2BradForYou. If you want to hit me up directly, @BradleyW Hayes on Twitter. Flash, if they want to touch you up in any way, shape, or form,
Ooh. Touch
wear a glove, wear a mask, and
at bvampiredon on all the social platforms.
so
Website for the show, twobradforyou.wordpress.com. One of these days I'll get an official website and remove that WordPress so we don't seem so amateur.
well, we may look amateur, on that website, but obviously once people listen to us, they can see that we truly are
Right.
really amateurish.
And
So
until people start donating to the show,
yeah,
I can't afford
then right,
all those
exactly.
things.
If listeners can hear the violin, if you can just feed the violins in though, Flash, on
Yeah.
post production, just to really ebb that story along, that'd be perfect.
Wow.
Flash, as always, it's been a pleasure and not a chore. The time always seems to fly by when we do these things, so thank you. And actually, we should say to listeners, we potentially might be in the future putting out a bit of a video cast of some of these as well, so you can see. Depends on a few of the technicalities. Flash has got to work through that. We're doing some pilot work at the moment,
And we got to look at
so
the
you may
budget
actually.
again.
Well, yeah, we're always looking at those budget numbers. But listeners, you may not be listeners, you may be viewers as well as listeners potentially in the future. Listeners, don't be complacent. Stay safe. Follow the advice that's been given. Wash your hands. Wear a mask. Socially distance, because we can't afford to lose any of you. We've said that before. Flash, anything you want to say before we press the end on this and
No, that's it.
go for a
Stay safe,
social
everyone.
distance pint?
Enjoy your being able to get out when you can, see your family, see your loved ones, and yeah.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Cheers. the testing, and then let's have a conversation and see what happens and where it goes. And
Okay. Yeah, yeah, cool. Because I could see. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Actually, that probably makes more sense. Never mind. Forget what I was thinking, and forget all that shit I said about me being a professional. Because clearly,
I never believed that for a second.
it's out the window now. Oh, I also joined a. There was a.
Swinging club.
Yeah. Uh huh. Mm-hmm.
Welcome to Germany.
Done that. Yeah, that's. I mean, you have to when you as soon as you get your visa here.
Right, I thought
So
so.
just
That's
like
part of it. Yeah.
it's mandatory. You have to at least try it, and then you can be like, This is not for me." Yeah,
What in
but we tried.
Austrian?
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. It's a Bavarian thing.